Ronnie de Mel remained a good friend of my late leader, M.H.M. Ashraf. Subsequently, in his days in Parliament, Mr. Ashraf always sought the counsel of people of his caliber. We have really, truly lost a true son of the soil.
ගරු නීතිඥ රවුප් හකීම් මැතිතුමා.
ගරු නියෝජ්‍ය කතානායකතුමනි, මෙම ගරු සභාවේ දීර්ඝ කාලයක් කටයුතු කරපු විශේෂයෙන්ම රටටම උදාරතර සේවාවක් ජේ.ආර්. ජයවර්ධන ආණ්ඩු කාලේ විවෘත ආර්ථිකය ඉදිරිපත් කිරීමේ කර්තව්‍යයේ මුදල් අමාත්‍ය හැටියටත් කටයුතු කරපු අභාවප්‍රාප්ත රොනි ඩ මෙල් මැතිතුමන් වෙනුවෙන් ශ්‍රී ලංකා මුස්ලිම් කොංග්‍රසය නියෝජනය කරමින් වචන ස්වල්පයක් එකතු කිරීමට ලැබුණු මේ අවස්ථාව මම අගය කොට සලකනවා. Honorable Deputy Speaker, I would like to pay our tribute to a quintessential political figure that this country has produced, who was a towering intellectual, particularly when you look at his profile. What comes to our mind is that he had quit the Ceylon civil service. The then civil service was unlike the present civil service, was of such good quality. He entered Parliament in 1967 and he had led Sri Lankan delegations to finance ministers' conferences, 8 group meetings, 20 World Bank and IMF meetings, several economic trade investment promotion meetings, umpteen number of bilateral meetings with several countries. And he was also one of the authors of the agricultural plan in 1957. He was distinguished as a scholar chosen to Oxford in 1942, becoming the first in London matriculation examination. Then awarded scholarship to Cambridge for becoming first in degree examination in 1947. So such a towering intellectual personality adorned this house. But then I am sorry to see that the government benches are all empty. To a certain extent, even opposition benches are also nearly empty. I believe there is only one more speaker in the government benches. Honourable Minister Nalin Fernando is waiting there to speak after me, perhaps. So it is because of the current political situation with the presidential election on, it is unfortunate. Though the opposition leader found time, being a presidential candidate, to come and say a few words, I am sorry to see that the president himself, who had been a colleague of him in Parliament for several years, hadn't found the time. But anyway, I don't want to delve into personal matters. But I would like to record my regret that it would have been a little appropriate and fitting if, we were also waiting to listen to what President would have had to say about such a towering figure under whose tutelage he also learned a lot of economic fundamentals. So, having said that, I want to quote at length from some of these, in his colourful political career, he has had various ups and downs. There had been variety of accusations thrown at him. It is legendary today that a colourful person of his caliber has had such a checkered political history for the reason because of the type of politics in this country. But he was a parliamentarian representing the Sri Lanka Freedom Party originally, but who was overlooked for office for many long years, which left him quite frustrated, I assume. And finally, it was the late J.R. Jayawardena who saw the potential in the man, gave him the all-important ministry of the Ministry of Finance. Well, after a few years, with all his monumental efforts to introduce the new economic policies, the market-oriented system gradually being absorbed into the policy framework of the country, and he was seen as an architect who developed the country to such an extent. But unfortunately, from 1983 onwards, this country got engulfed by ethnic tension. On the one side, in the north, the LTT's armed struggle against the armed forces of Sri Lanka, and then by the time when it came to 1988, almost on the verge of a presidential election, where the president, since there was two-term limit, Mr. J.R. Jayawardena obviously couldn't contest, but there were reports to say that he tried to even try and see whether he can extend his term beyond the two-term limit. But then, however, that was a time when Mr. Ronnie de Mel decided that he must allow his conscience to speak. So I would like to quote from some of his speeches, in particularly the famous or infamous resignation speech from Parliament in 1988. Now, he had many a good word for President J.R. Jayawardena. He starts off like this: Sir, I have received many personal courtesies and kindnesses from His Excellency the President for the last 13 years. And I have no hesitation in stating here quite openly that I have had and will continue to have a great personal regard for him, which will not diminish but will probably increase as a result of his parting of our ways in the political arena and his possible retirement soon. If he retires, I can only wish him and the gracious lady, his wife, Mrs. Elena Jayawardena, all the best in their retirement. He prefaces his speech, having served the president for so many years as his finance minister, he is quitting his party at the last moment. And it's very interesting to see how because his long speech is mostly in Sinhala, but I like to quote only the portions in English because the salient points which I want to highlight are in those words spoken in English. I have always felt very strongly, almost passionately, that elections were essential to the whole process. Clean elections, free and fair elections, as we've had from 1947 to 1977. And even the presidential elections are essential. Both presidential elections and parliamentary general elections should be held at the correct time. I have said these things. I have expressed these views loudly and clearly, not to hurt anyone, but to diffuse the present tension, to restore peace in our land and save our country and our people from complete and total ruin and destruction. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this was a time that Devinura electorate and the entire Matara and entire South was engulfed in flames by the famous second uprising of the JVP. The JVP insurrection was at its peak. Now his speech reflects some of his ideas then. When the whole atmosphere in this house and in this country was charged with tension. I have been in this house for 21 years and I have never seen it charged with tension as on that day when I made that speech just half an hour before all of us had to go to attend the funeral of Mr. Harsha Abeyewardene. Everybody knows who killed Harsha Abeyewardene, the Secretary of United National Party. It is not that I loved anybody less, sir, but that I loved my country more. I could not help saying what I said that day. It came straight from my heart because I thought I had to make that speech to save this country from the total destruction and total ruin. Now, these were the speeches that, Honorable Leader of the Opposition a while ago talked about some disagreements Honorable Ronnie de Mel had with the Honorable late President Ranasinghe Premadasa. It all stems from this scenario. The only possible way to reduce this tension and to solve the present problems in the north and the east, also in the south and in every part of the country, is elections, quick elections, free and fair elections. Now, this was a time when there was this talk of putting off elections, not having elections because of violence, right? Now, we are in a situation where even without violence, elections are put off, right? That was the situation in the past. Several elections have been put off. But finally, we are on the verge of facing another election. I hope this president will not have another change of mind to try and look at the tricks that the administration then were trying. When you deprive them of the vote, you force them to throw bombs and resort to violence. When you ban political parties, you send them underground, you force them to resort to violence. This is abject lesson. This is what has happened in Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina, the prime minister who has been ousted and chased away from the country, was somebody who had even delivered the country out of the economic mess. Bangladesh today has recorded the fastest economic growth in the region. Yet she was chased away. Why? Because she was acting against democracy. She was imprisoning opposition members. She disregarded all norms in holding free and fair elections. Last elections, only about 40 to 45% voted. For the first time after many long years in this region, a voting percentage below 60% took place in Bangladesh. So such was the situation. So I'm going to quote these words of Mr. Ronnie de Mel, spoken on the 25th of August 1988 in this house. There were powerful elements, and there still are powerful elements within the government and close to the government who believe in military power and military power alone, who believe in the militarization of this country, who ultimately believe in a military dictatorship. See the strong words. These are the strong words that brought about this kind of dissension. I believe only in peace, in parliamentary elections, in presidential elections, in clean and peaceful elections, which are conducted in a free and fair manner. I blame sections within the government for the delay in the solution to the problem in the north and the east. It is not only the intransigence of the LTTE, it is a sabotage from within the government that has delayed the sending back of the Indian troops. Now the most interesting part, Mr. Deputy Speaker, comes towards the end. Now here he says, there comes a time, sir, he says, in the life of every man and politician when he must take the painful decision to be true to himself, true to his conscience, true to his country, true to his people, when he must rise above friends. All of them are my friends, my dear friends, and I hope that they will remain my dear friends. I thanked all of them earlier in my speech, a time when we must rise above considerations of friendship, when we must be prepared to move away from our own relations, when we must rise above personal interest, when we must even rise above party and other petty sectarian difference, above power, above personal and above self. There are times when a politician must have the courage to disagree and even part company with friends, with dear friends. In my case, with friends with whom I have worked so closely, so well for 13 years. Believe me, sir, for me, it was a very painful decision. I thought about this for nearly 8 months, both here and abroad. But I cannot sacrifice for party what was meant for the country, as Edmund Burke once said, what was meant for mankind. Certain sections of the press in Sri Lanka have been writing great deal of highly imaginative, inaccurate accounts, sometimes of my resignation. It is the privilege of the press to indulge in flights of fancy. They have hinted that I will take an international job. It is true that I have been offered several international jobs at a very high salary, higher perhaps than any other Sri Lankan ever have been offered, but I have turned them down. I will live and die here in Sri Lanka, serving the people of my country till my last breath. These are the words of the late Ronnie de Mel. At this time of deep crisis in the history of our country, in this dark hour, I will stay in my motherland and fight with my last breath to bring about peace, national reconciliation, and national consensus, which this country needs above all things. I seek the help and cooperation of all the sensible, patriotic people in all parties, and also all those who have no allegiance to any political party, all men and women of goodwill and sound understanding, particularly the Mahasangha, leader of the other religions, intellectuals, professionals, public servants, and so on and so forth. I appeal to all these sections to help restore peace, security, law and order, democracy, and human liberties in this land. This was a time when all of which was in peril. Let us fight to the last drop of our blood for peace, above all for free and fair elections. In a situation like this, not a problem could be solved by just continuing with the state of emergency and emergency laws. He's very critical of his own government's emergency laws. Then he says, we must evolve a political solution to the problems in the north and the east, and a political solution for the problems in the south. The army cannot suppress and keep down the youth. of this country forever. I put my trust in the people and the people alone. I salute the people. I salute the power of the people, the victory of the people, and the people's power. Thank you. This is what late Honorable Ronnie de Mel said in his last resignation speech. And what happened thereafter? Thereafter, we see from the records of Parliament that he rejoins his party back again, right? He is now, this is why I want to clarify this matter, since the Honorable Opposition leader did mention about certain disagreements and disenchantments between the two, Mr. Ronnie de Mel and his father, Ranasinghe Premadasa. What does Ranasinghe Premadasa do after he becomes the president? In 1989, United National Party appoints him in the national list. Then again, he is allowed to contest the 94 elections as a United National Party member in 1994. He was appointed Minister of Port and Shipping in late Ranasinghe Premadasa's cabinet. Then he was appointed Minister of Economic and Industrial Development in the next parliament thereafter. So, though there were differences, but Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa did respect his seniority, his value to his team. He did accommodate him in cabinet and decorated him despite all what happened just before the presidential elections, where Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa was a chosen candidate finally. And I did mention yesterday in Sugadadasa Stadium about how Ranasinghe Premadasa became president. It was because my late leader, Mr. M.H.M. Ashraf. At the last moment, we left Mrs. Bandaranayaka's DPA coalition over some disagreements. And we joined Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa's campaign in an indirect way, through which we were able to make him win with a very slender margin. And that was all history, but yet Mr. Ronnie de Mel remained a good friend of my late leader, M.H.M. Ashraf. Subsequently, in his days in Parliament, Mr. Ashraf always sought the counsel of people of his caliber when it came to matters of the economy and finance in this country. We have really, truly lost a true son of the soil, and as a Thomian, I would say, the Thomians always talk about their grit and determination. And that was something, was quite apparently a quality that Ronnie de Mel possessed throughout his political career. Grit and determination, as all Thomians proudly claim to be. Therefore, having said those words, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I may digress momentarily out of while conveying my condolences to all the family members of late Ronnie de Mel. I would like to, because of urgent importance, I would like to raise a particular issue, because this is also an issue, because Mr. Ronnie de Mel was thought to be minister who opened this country to the outside world.